The wind howled through the shattered spires of Velmarch like the dying breath of forgotten gods. Ezran Talmir had learned long ago that debts in the Borderlands were never paid in simple coin. The monsters here, both human and otherwise, traded in flesh, blood, and souls. Yet even for a man who'd traversed the twilight edges of civilization for 15 years, what knelt before him now defied expectation. The contract felt heavier than parchment had any right to be. Lord Corvain's estate loomed behind them, a decaying monument to vampire aristocracy that had somehow survived 3 human crusades and twice as many internal purges. The debt collector, a wiry creature with too many joints in his fingers, had departed moments ago, leaving Ezran alone with his payment. She knelt in the courtyard where moonlight fractured through ancient stained glass, each shard of colored light painting her pale skin in bleeding hues of ruby and sapphire. The woman, no, the vampire, kept her head bowed, silver hair cascading forward like a waterfall of starlight, concealing her face. Torn silk clung to curves that would have made mortal sculptors weep, the fabric once noble purple now stained with ash and old blood. Golden manacles circled her wrists, their chains severed but the cuffs remaining, etched with suppression runes that pulsed with a sickly amber glow. Ezran had seen slaves before. He'd freed some, killed the masters of others. This was different. "Stand," he said quietly, his voice carrying the rough edges of too many languages learned in too many desperate places. She didn't move. The wings, those magnificent extensions of membrane and bone that emerged from her shoulder blades, trembled slightly. They were larger than any vampire wings he'd encountered, spanning nearly 12 feet even partially folded, their interior surfaces traced with veins that glowed faintly crimson in the darkness. I said stand. Firmer this time but not cruel. Ezran had no taste for cruelty even when it might be expected. Slowly, incrementally she rose. The movement was liquid grace despite the obvious weakness in her limbs, despite the way the suppression cuffs must have been draining her strength. When she finally lifted her head, Ezran felt something in his chest tighten, an old warrior's instinct that had kept him alive when better men had died. Her eyes burned like coals in a funeral pyre. Crimson irises ringed with gold, holding depths of rage and sorrow and something else entirely, a terrible, banked intelligence that no slave should possess. Her face was devastatingly beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were. High cheekbones, full lips pressed into a firm line, skin like porcelain that had never known the warmth of true sunlight. But it was the sigils that made him pause. They were faint, almost invisible in the dim light, but Ezran had studied enough vampire lore to recognize royal bloodline marks when he saw them. Intricate patterns traced along her collarbone, disappearing beneath the torn neckline of her garment, geometric designs that spoke of old magic, older power, and bloodlines that predated the current ruling houses. "What's your name?" Ezran asked, tucking the contract into his belt. Her lips parted. Her voice, when it came, was silk over steel. "I am called Seraphine." "That's not what I asked." A flicker of something, surprise? Respect? Crossed her features. "Names have power, human. The one who held my debt took mine and bound it. Seraphine is what remains." Ezran studied her for a long moment. The courtyard around them was silent save for the wind and the distant sound of something howling in the blackwood forest beyond the estate walls. Red embers drifted through the air, remnants of a fire that had consumed the eastern wing weeks ago, still burning in some deep, magical way that refused extinction. "I'm Ezran," he said finally. "Ezran Talmir. I came here to collect a debt Lord Corvain owed me, 3,000 silver marks for a retrieval job that nearly cost me my life. Instead, his executor handed me a contract and you." "The Lord is dead," Seraphine said flatly. "His house is ash. His coffers are empty. I am all that remains of value. You're not a thing to be valued." Her eyes widened fractionally. It was, Ezran realized, perhaps the first time anyone had said such words to her in a very long time. "Nevertheless," she continued, her composure returning like a mask sliding back into place, "by the laws of debt and binding, I am yours until the contract is fulfilled. 3 years of service, or until my assessed value is repaid through labor." Ezran glanced at the contract. The executor had explained it in gleeful detail, how Seraphine had been part of Corvain's household, how her service could be transferred, how she was trained in combat languages, and what the creature had called certain other arts, with a leer that made Ezrin want to break his face. And if I void the contract? Seraphine's expression hardened. Then I become property of the Crimson Magistrate, to be auctioned to the highest bidder. There are many who would pay dearly for a vampire of my particular attributes. The way she said it suggested a fate worse than simple slavery. I see. Ezrin rolled his shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of his twin blades shift against his back. The practical part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive in places where men became monsters and monsters became myths, was already calculating. A vampire companion, even a weakened one, could be invaluable in the territories he traveled. The suppression cuffs limited her strength but not her knowledge, and vampires lived centuries. The information she possessed alone might be worth the complication. The other part of his mind, the part that remembered being a boy in a village that no longer existed, remembered kindness as a form of rebellion against a cruel world. Do those hurt? He nodded toward the golden cuffs. Seraphine glanced at her wrists. They are uncomfortable. They suppress my strength, limit my abilities, and prevent me from feeding properly. But they do not cause active pain unless I attempt to break their commands. And if I asked you to remove them, could you? No. Only the one who holds my contract can release their magic, or a blood sorcerer of sufficient skill. Ezrin stepped forward. Seraphine tensed but didn't retreat, even as he reached for her right wrist. Up close he could smell her, night-blooming flowers and something metallic, the scent of ancient blood. The cuff was warm under his fingers, the runes shifting and writhing like living things. He'd picked up more than a few tricks in his travels. Blood magic wasn't his specialty, but he'd learned enough to be dangerous. Hold still, he murmured, tracing one of the runes with his thumb. The magic resisted, pushing back against his will, but Ezrin had forced locks more complex than this. He drew a knife from his belt, not silver, thankfully just good steel, and pricked his thumb. 3 drops of blood fell onto the cuff's surface, and he spoke a word in the old tongue, the language that predated empires. The runes flared bright amber, then shattered. The cuff fell from Seraphine's wrist and hit the stone with a heavy clang. Her gasp was audible, her whole body shuddering as power rushed back into her. Ezrin quickly repeated the process with the second cuff, and when it too fell away, Seraphine staggered. He caught her automatically, one arm around her waist as her legs nearly buckled. She was cold to the touch but not unpleasantly so, like marble that had rested in shadow. Easy, he said. You've been suppressed for a while. Your body needs to remember what strength feels like. Seraphine's hands had gripped his shoulders reflexively, her claws. He could feel them now, sharp points that had emerged with her returned power, digging slightly through his leather armor. Her face was inches from his, those crimson eyes wide with shock and something that might have been gratitude or might have been fear. Why? She whispered. Because I'm not interested in owning people, Ezrin said simply. And because those things were torture devices dressed up as restraints. He helped her stand upright, then stepped back, giving her space. Seraphine flexed her fingers, examining her freed wrists where pale skin showed faint scars from years of wearing the cuffs. Power radiated from her now, not threatening but present, undeniable. Her wings extended slightly, testing their range, and even in their weakened state they were magnificent. You've made a dangerous choice, Ezrin Talmir, she said quietly. A vampire unbound is a vampire unpredictable. Are you planning to attack me? She considered the question with unnerving seriousness. No. Then we're fine. He retrieved his pack from where he'd dropped it near the courtyard entrance. I'm heading south to Greymark. There's an alchemist there who owes me a favor, and I need supplies before winter makes the northern passes impassable. You're welcome to come with me or you can go your own way. The contract? He pulled it from his belt and held it over a nearby brazier still glowing with embers, is void. The parchment caught fire, curling and blackening as ancient ink bubbled and hissed. Seraphine watched it burn with an expression Ezrin couldn't quite read. Just like that? She asked. You free me, void a legal contract worth thousands, and simply let me go? Just like that. Silence stretched between them. A dark rose, one of the blood-fed flowers that grew wild in vampire territories, released its petals nearby, the crimson fragments scattering across the courtyard stones like drops of spilled life. I have nowhere to go, Seraphine said finally, and for the first time, her voice carried the weight of absolute truth. Everything I was, everything I had, it's gone. Lost. Taken. Ezrin studied her, really looked at her. Beneath the beauty and the danger he saw exhaustion. The kind of bone-deep weariness that came from surviving when death would have been easier. Then come with me, he said. Not as a slave. As a companion. I could use someone who knows these territories, and you look like you could use a decent meal and a purpose that isn't servitude. I am a vampire, Ezrin Talmir. I drink blood to survive. I'm aware. I cannot walk in sunlight. Will travel by night. My kind are hunted by your kind. My kind hunt anything they don't understand. I'm not interested in that particular tradition. Seraphine's lips curved into something that might have been the ghost of a smile. You are either the most foolish human I've met or the wisest. I'll let you know when I figure out which. Ezrin shouldered his pack. So, are you coming? She looked back at the ruins of Corvain's estate, at the place where she'd been held and degraded and reduced to chattel. Then she looked at Ezrin, at this strange human who'd freed her for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. Yes, Seraphine said. I am coming. They left Velmarch as the moon reached its zenith, casting the world in shades of silver and shadow. Ezrin set a steady pace, not rushed but purposeful, his boots crunching on the frost-brittle grass that bordered the old Imperial road. Seraphine moved beside him with eerie silence, her feet barely seeming to touch the ground, her wings folded tight against her back beneath a hooded cloak Ezrin had provided from his pack. The Blackwood forest loomed to their left, a wall of ancient trees whose branches intertwined so thickly that no moonlight penetrated their depths. Sounds emerged from that darkness, howls, crashes, the occasional scream that might have been animal or might have been something far worse. The borderlands were lawless in the truest sense. The human kingdoms ended miles back, and the vampire territories were fractured into a dozen warring houses, none strong enough to claim dominion but all vicious enough to make the attempt. Ezrin had learned to navigate these in-between places. The secret was to be useful but not valuable, dangerous but not threatening, forgettable until you needed to be remembered. Having a vampire at his side changed that calculus considerably. You move well for someone who was recently suppressed, Ezrin observed after an hour of silent travel. The cuffs weaken me but I am still what I am. Seraphine's voice carried easily despite the wind. My kind do not age as yours do. The strength returns quickly. How long were you bound? Pause. By the cuffs? 3 years. Before that, another pause, longer this time. Time loses meaning in captivity. Ezrin didn't push. He knew the shape of trauma, had carried enough of his own to recognize its weight in others. They walked on. The road curved eastward, following the contour of the valley. In the distance, lights flickered. A caravan probably making the dangerous night crossing to reach Greymark before dawn. Smart travelers moved in groups here, hired guards, kept their valuables hidden and their weapons close. Tell me about Greymark, Seraphine said suddenly. I have not heard of this place. It's new relatively speaking. Started as a mining settlement about 20 years ago, grew when they discovered a vein of silver iron in the mountains. Now it's a trade hub, neutral ground where humans and vampires can conduct business without automatically trying to kill each other. The Alchemists Guild maintains a strong presence there, which helps keep the peace. Nobody wants to piss off the alchemists. Wise, Seraphine murmured. And your contact there? Magister Kellen. She's a master alchemist, specializes in protective wards and counter curses. Saved my life in Velthrad when I ran afoul of a blood hex. I helped her acquire some rare components in return, but she still owes me a favor or two. You collect favors like some men collect gold. Ezrin smiled slightly. Favors are more useful than gold in places like this. Gold can be stolen. Favors build networks. They passed a milestone marker, the stone worn smooth by weather and time. Gray mark, 47 miles. They could make it by dawn if they maintained pace, though Ezran would need to rest before then. Unlike his companion, he still required sleep. "May I ask you something?" Seraphine's voice carried a different quality now, not hesitant but careful, as if she were testing the boundaries of their new dynamic. "Ask. Why do you travel these lands? You are clearly skilled, clearly intelligent. You could live comfortably in any number of human cities, take a normal profession, have a normal life. Why risk yourself here, in the places where monsters dwell?" Ezran was quiet for several steps. The question was fair and it deserved a real answer. "Because normal is a luxury," he said finally. "I grew up in a village called Thornhaven, deep in the eastern provinces. When I was 12, a vampire lord decided our village had failed to pay proper tribute. His soldiers came at night. They killed everyone, men, women, children. They made a lesson of us." Seraphine's expression shifted, something painful flickering across her features. "I survived because I hid," Ezran continued. "Crawled into a root cellar and stayed there while my family died above me. When I finally came out, I was alone in a village of corpses. A merchant caravan found me 3 days later, half mad with thirst and trauma." "I am sorry," Seraphine said quietly. "So am I." Ezran adjusted the strap of his pack. "I spent years angry. Trained with anyone who would teach me, learn to fight, learn to kill. I was going to be a monster hunter, going to wage a one-man war against all vampires everywhere. But you didn't." "No. Because when I was 18, I tracked a vampire who'd been killing farmers in the Southlands. Cornered her in an abandoned mill. She was half-starved, terrified, barely more than a child by vampire standards. She'd been cast out by her house for refusing to kill an innocent, and she was dying because she wouldn't break her vow." Ezran remembered that night with crystal clarity, the girl's crimson eyes wide with fear, her hands raised not to attack but to plead. "I gave her blood," he said. "My own. Enough to survive. Helped her reach the borderlands where she could disappear. And I realized something. Monsters aren't defined by their species. They're defined by their choices." A dangerously idealistic philosophy for someone in your profession. Maybe. But it's kept me human in places that make monsters of better men. Seraphine absorbed this in silence. They crested a small hill, and the landscape opened before them. Rolling grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains, the peaks capped with early snow that gleamed like bone in the moonlight. "You should know something," Seraphine said abruptly. "About who I am. What I am." Ezran glanced at her. "The royal bloodline marks gave me a hint." She stopped walking. Ezran stopped too, turning to face her fully. The wind whipped her silver hair around her face, and her wings extended slightly, an unconscious gesture that spoke of agitation or resolve. "I am Seraphine Valdris," she said, and the name carried weight like a stone dropped in still water. "Third daughter of House Valdris, one of the oldest and wealthiest vampire houses in the Crimson Dominion. My family's territory spans 3 provinces. Our vaults hold treasures that predate your human empires. My mother is Lady Ilara Valdris, holder of the Blood Throne and ruler of the Northern Courts." Ezran's expression didn't change, though internally he was recalculating everything. House Valdris wasn't just wealthy, they were legendary. Their power was spoken of in whispers even in human territories. "So how does a vampire princess end up as collateral for a dead lord's debt?" he asked. Seraphine's jaw tightened. "Betrayal. Ambition. The usual poisons that destroy great houses from within." She resumed walking and Ezran fell into step beside her. "My eldest sister Morgana desired the throne. My mother is old, ancient even by our standards, and her power has waned. Morgana sought to accelerate her inheritance." "She tried to kill your mother?" "No. She tried to kill me." Seraphine's voice was flat, emotionless in the way that indicated deep pain carefully buried. "I was my mother's favorite, you see. Her chosen heir. Morgana could not allow that. So she arranged for me to be ambushed during a diplomatic mission. Her agents used blood-binding sorcery to suppress my power, then sold me to slavers who altered my appearance, masked my bloodline marks and trafficked me through a dozen different hands. And no one recognized you? Would you recognize a queen if she were dressed in rags and chains, her power stripped away, her identity erased? People see what they expect to see. A beautiful vampire slave is common enough in these territories. A missing princess is a scandal whispered about in courts, not a reality acknowledged in slave pens. Ezran processed this. Your family must be searching for you. Perhaps. If my mother still lives. If Morgana hasn't completed her coup. I've been gone for 3 years, Ezran. Empires can fall in less time. And Corvain? How did you end up with him? He purchased me from a slave trader 6 months ago. He was a minor lord, insignificant, but he had connections to certain, unsavory markets. I was part of his collection. The disgust in her voice was palpable. When you came to collect your debt, he was already dead, killed by one of his own servants in a dispute over unpaid wages. His executor was simply liquidating assets. They walked in silence for a while. Ezran's mind was churning through implications. Seraphine wasn't just a vampire, she was a political entity. Her very existence was a threat to whoever had orchestrated her disappearance. If word got out that she was alive, free, and traveling the borderlands with a human mercenary, this changes things, he said finally. Yes. You're not safe. Not really. If your sister learns you've surfaced, then she will send assassins. Seraphine's tone was matter-of-fact. And not simple ones. Morgana commands blood sorcerers, shadow weavers, and creatures that make common vampires look like children's tales. If she wants me dead, and she does, she will not stop until that task is accomplished. Why tell me this? You could have stayed silent, used me as cover until you reached safety. Seraphine stopped again, turning to face him directly. The moonlight caught her eyes, making them glow like burning rubies. Because you freed me when you had no reason to. Because you voided a contract that had value and asked for nothing in return. Because you are either a fool or a decent man, and I find myself hoping desperately that you are the latter. Her hand rose, hesitated, then gently touched his chest. Not a threat, but a gesture that was almost vulnerable. I will not let you walk into danger blindly because of me, she continued. If you wish to part ways here, I will understand. I will not think less of you for choosing survival over complicated loyalty to a woman you met an hour ago. Ezran looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Behind the regal bearing and the supernatural beauty, he saw what he'd seen in the courtyard. Exhaustion, hope, and a desperate need to believe that kindness still existed in a world that had shown her mostly cruelty. How far is your family's territory from here? He asked. Seraphine blinked, clearly not expecting the question. 200 miles north. Why? Because after we reach Greymark, after I resupply and call in my favor with Kellen, we're going to get you home. Ezran. You said your mother was your champion. If there's a chance she's still alive, still in power, then you need to reach her. And if she's not, well then we'll figure that out too. This isn't your fight. It is now. Ezran resumed walking. Besides, you know what they say about humans. What do they say? He glanced back at her with a slight smile. We're too stubborn to know when we're outmatched. For the first time since he'd met her, Seraphine laughed. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine. She hurried to catch up with him, and together they continued down the road, two unlikely companions walking into an uncertain future. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of mortals and immortals alike. But in the spaces between starlight and shadow, something stirred, awareness focusing, attention turning, and in the distant courts of the Crimson Dominion, a message began its journey to ears that had waited years to hear it. The lost princess had been found. They reached the outskirts of Greymark as dawn threatened the eastern horizon. Seraphine pulled her hood lower, the thick fabric concealing her distinctive features and the faint luminescence of her bloodline marks. Ezran noted the gesture. Even weakened and disguised, her instincts for survival were sharp. Greymark sprawled across a natural plateau, its buildings a chaotic mix of architectural styles that reflected its diverse population. Human stone structures stood beside vampire night houses with their shuttered, lightless windows. Merchant stalls built from salvaged imperial timber competed for space with mobile blood shops, their red lanterns advertising services that Ezran preferred not to contemplate too closely. The city never truly slept. As the night shift of workers headed for their beds, the day shift emerged, blinking in the pre-dawn gloom. Guards in mismatched armor manned the walls, mercenaries mostly paid by the Merchant Council to maintain order regardless of species. It was said that in Greymark your gold's color mattered more than your blood's. They entered through the night gate, the western entrance that remained open around the clock. The guards barely glanced at them. A human traveler and his cloaked companion were common enough sights. "Where is this alchemist of yours?" Seraphine asked quietly as they navigated the narrow streets. "The Guild Quarter. Central District." Ezran adjusted course, leading them through a maze of alleys and covered walkways. He knew Greymark well enough to avoid the main thoroughfares, where questions were more likely and attention was dangerous. The Guild Quarter occupied the heart of the city, its buildings marked by elaborate sigils that glowed with permanent enchantments. The Alchemist Guild Hall rose above its neighbors, a structure of white stone that seemed to repel the grime and shadow that clung to everything else in Greymark. Ezran approached a smaller building adjacent to the hall, a workshop identified only by a simple copper plaque. Kellen Master Alchemist by appointment only. He knocked, 3 times fast, twice slow, once fast. A code. The door opened immediately. The woman who answered was middle-aged by human standards, her dark hair threaded with silver and pulled back in a practical braid. Burned scars traced her left arm, and her eyes were the pale blue of alchemical fire. She wore the black and gold robes of a master alchemist, stained with various substances that probably shouldn't be identified too closely. "Ezran Talmir," Magister Kellen said, her voice carrying the crisp diction of someone who'd attended the Imperial Academy. "I wondered when you'd collect on that favor." "Kellen. Good to see you alive." "The sentiment is mutual." Her gaze shifted to Seraphine, and something sharp entered her expression. Recognition of what, not necessarily who. "You're traveling with interesting company these days." "Long story." "I imagine it is. Come in, both of you. Quickly now." They entered, and Kellen shut and sealed the door behind them. The workshop beyond was organized chaos, shelves lined with bottles of every color imaginable, workbenches covered in equipment ranging from simple mortars and pestles to complex distillation apparatus that hummed with barely contained magic. The air smelled of sulfur, roses, and something that made Ezran's eyes water. "Don't breathe too deeply," Kellen advised. "I'm working on a new formula for dispersing shadow kin. The fumes are aggressive." Seraphine pulled back her hood now that they were in private. Kellen's eyebrows rose appreciably. "Well," the alchemist said. "That is certainly interesting company. Magister Kellen, this is Seraphine Valdris." Seraphine Kellen. To her credit, Kellen's expression barely shifted at the name, though Ezran saw the slight widening of her eyes. "Valdris. As in House Valdris. As in the house that has been searching for a missing daughter for 3 years while simultaneously denying anything was wrong." "The very same," Seraphine said coolly. "You look like you've been through several hells." "An accurate assessment." Kellen studied her for a moment longer, then nodded as if confirming something to herself. "Sit. Both of you. You look exhausted, Ezran, and you," she addressed Seraphine, "look like you haven't fed properly in weeks." "I manage," Seraphine said. "Managing and thriving are different things." Kellen moved to a locked cabinet, withdrawing a crystal vial filled with dark red liquid. "Synthetic blood. Not as good as the real thing, but it's nutritionally complete and won't leave you weakened. A gift before we discuss whatever favor you're about to ask me." Seraphine accepted the vial with visible surprise. She unstoppered it carefully and drank, and Ezran watched color return to her cheeks, watched the faint tremor in her hand steady. She'd been weaker than she'd let on. "Thank you," Seraphine said and meant it. Kellen waved it off and turned her attention to Ezran. "So, what brings you to my door with a runaway vampire princess?" "I need information," Ezran said. "And probably supplies." We're heading north into Valdris territory. Ah. Ambitious, suicidal, or both? Both likely. Kellen sighed and poured herself a measure of something amber from a decanter. She didn't offer any to Ezran. He knew from experience that her personal stock was alchemically enhanced in ways that would put a human in a coma. House Valdris has been in turmoil for 3 years, Kellen said. Lady Alara still holds the throne, but her grip weakens. The eldest daughter, Morgana, has consolidated power through a series of strategic marriages and alliances. There are rumors of blood purges, of entire cadet branches of the house disappearing in the night. My sister's work, Seraphine said bitterly. If you're going there, Kellen continued, you'll need more than good intentions and sharp swords. Valdris Keep is a fortress. The approaches are watched. Morgana has surrounded herself with blood sorcerers and shadow kin. Simply reaching the gates will be a challenge. Getting inside alive will be nearly impossible. Nearly isn't never, Ezran said. Kellen smiled slightly. I've always appreciated your optimism, even when it borders on delusion. She moved to one of her workbenches, considering. I can give you supplies. Concealment potions, warding charms, something to help you pass through the outer territories without drawing attention. But Ezran, you need to understand, this isn't like your usual jobs. You're walking into vampire high politics. One human and one runaway princess against an entire house that wants her dead. What would you suggest? Don't go. Send word through channels, let Lady Alara know her daughter lives, arrange a meeting on neutral ground. And if the channels are compromised? If Morgana intercepts the message? Kellen had no answer to that. Seraphine spoke up. There may be another way. My mother has loyalists, servants, soldiers, advisors who would have remained true even if they couldn't act openly. If we can reach one of them, get a message inside the keep, we could arrange an extraction rather than an infiltration. Do you know where these loyalists are? Ezran asked. One, Seraphine said slowly as if pulling a memory from deep water. Commander Theron. He was captain of my mother's personal guard. If anyone would have survived Morgana's purges, it would be him. Last I knew, he maintained a secondary residence in Ravencross. Ravencross is on the way, Kellen confirmed. A waypoint settlement about 80 miles north of here. If your commander is there and still loyal, he could be your key to getting inside safely. Ezran considered this. It made tactical sense. Far better than simply showing up at the gates of an enemy fortress. But it also meant more time on the road, more opportunities for word of Seraphine's presence to spread. We'll need to move fast, he said. If someone recognized Seraphine in Velmarch, if word is already traveling. Then you have days at most before hunters are on your trail, Kellen finished. She began gathering items from her shelves, bottles, pouches, small boxes inscribed with protective runes. Take these. The blue vials are concealment drafts. They'll suppress magical auras for about 6 hours each. The powder in the leather pouch is for creating emergency wards. The black stone is a shadow anchor. It'll let you teleport to it once from anywhere within 10 miles, but only once, so use it wisely. She piled the items on the workbench, then added a final piece, a rolled parchment sealed with wax. And this is a letter of introduction to someone in Ravencross who owes me a significant favor. Marcus Thane. He's a human information broker who specializes in vampire politics. If anyone knows where Commander Theron is, it'll be him. Ezran gathered the items carefully, stowing them in his pack. This is more than a favor's worth. Consider it an investment in an unlikely story I hope to hear the ending of. Kellen's expression turned serious. Be careful, Ezran. The borderlands are dangerous, but vampire high courts are deadly. And you, she looked at Seraphine, you're walking back into a situation where people have already tried to kill you once. Are you certain this is what you want? Seraphine's hands curled into fists at her sides. My sister took everything from me. My title, my freedom, 3 years of my life. She tried to erase my very existence. I will not let her have my mother's throne as well. If I can stop her, if I can warn my mother and expose Morgana's treachery, then yes. This is what I want. Kellen nodded slowly. Then I wish you fortune, princess. You'll need it. They left as the sun crested the horizon, Seraphine's cloak pulled tight and a concealment draft working its subtle magic to mask her presence. Ezran led them through the waking city, avoiding crowds, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who belonged. They were a mile beyond Greymark's northern gate when Ezran felt it, that prickling at the base of his skull that meant being watched. He didn't turn, didn't break stride. We have a tail. Seraphine's posture didn't change, but he sensed her awareness sharpening. How many? At least 2. Maybe more. They picked us up at the gate. Morganas? Too soon to tell. Could be common bandits. Could be something worse. They continued walking. The road here wound through rocky terrain, offering plenty of places for ambush. Ezran's mind raced through scenarios, calculating angles and probabilities. When they make their move, he said quietly, don't kill them all. You want prisoners? I want information. Seraphine made a sound that might have been agreement or amusement. The attack came at a bend in the road where ancient stones created a natural choke point. 4 figures emerged from concealment, 3 vampires and 1 human, all armed, all moving with the coordination of practiced hunters. Ezran's blades were in his hands before conscious thought completed. Beside him, Seraphine's wings snapped open, her cloak falling away as power radiated from her now that the concealment draft's time had expired. Her eyes blazed crimson, and when she smiled, her fangs were very, very visible. Gentlemen, Ezran said calmly, you've made a mistake. The lead vampire, a scarred male with arms like twisted iron, laughed. We know who she is. Do you know what the bounty is for a Valdres princess? Probably less than the cost of your funerals, Ezran replied. Then the world exploded into violence. Ezran moved like water between rocks, fluid, unavoidable, finding the paths of least resistance that led to maximum damage. His right blade caught the human attacker's sword mid-swing, redirecting the momentum while his left blade opened a red line across the man's thigh. Not fatal but debilitating. The man went down with a cry. Seraphine was a revelation. Without the suppression cuffs, her true nature emerged like a storm released from containment. She moved faster than human eyes could easily follow, her wings propelling her through space in ways that defied conventional physics. The first vampire who reached for her found himself seized by the throat and hurled into the rocks with force that cracked stone. The second met her claws, elongated now more like talons, and discovered that vampire flesh could still bleed. The scarred leader proved more capable. He wielded a chain whip that glowed with binding runes, the same magic that had held Seraphine captive for years. When it lashed toward her, she hissed and recoiled, the memory of torture still fresh. Ezran intercepted it. His blade severed the chain mid-strike, the enchanted links falling harmlessly to the ground. The leader's eyes widened in shock, confusion at a human defending a vampire, horror at his best weapon ruined. Big mistake, Ezran said and closed the distance. The fight was brief and brutal. Ezran had trained with some of the best blades masters in 3 kingdoms. The scarred vampire had strength but not skill. Within seconds Ezran had him disarmed and on his knees, a blade pressed to his throat. Seraphine had subdued the remaining attacker, one hand wrapped around the vampire's wrist with pressure that kept him immobile and whimpering. Now, Ezran said conversationally, not even breathing hard, let's talk about who sent you. The scarred vampire spat blood. You think you're the first to ask? I don't break easy, human. No, but you'll break. Ezran's voice was calm, which somehow made it more threatening. See, I don't need you. I have 3 other prisoners. Odds are at least one of them will be smart enough to trade information for mercy. He said it loudly enough for all the captives to hear. The human with the bleeding leg immediately started talking. Ravencross. We're from Ravencross. Marcus Thane hired us. Said there'd be a vampire princess heading north. Said whoever brought her in alive would get paid in platinum. The scarred vampire cursed viciously. Ezran met Seraphine's eyes. She looked troubled. Marcus Thane. That's the name on Kellen's letter of introduction. Indeed it is. Ezran pressed his blade a fraction harder against the scarred vampire's throat. How did Thane know we were coming? We just decided to head to Ravencross a few hours ago. I don't know, I swear. The human was babbling now. Thane knows things, he always knows things. That's his business. He said the princess would come through Greymark, said to watch the North Road. We were just taking a contract. A bounty hunter contract on a princess, Seraphine said coldly. Do you understand what you were trying to do? I am not cattle to be collected. We were just... The human couldn't seem to form coherent sentences anymore. Ezran considered their options. They needed to reach Ravencross, needed to find Commander Theron. But if Marcus Thane was already selling information about Seraphine's movements, the situation was more complicated than a simple betrayal. Seraphine, he said. Your call. What do we do with them? She could have killed them. By vampire law, by the laws of self-defense, by any reasonable code, she had that right. Ezran saw the hunger in her eyes, not for blood, but for retribution, for power over those who'd sought to take her power away. But then she straightened, releasing the vampire she'd been holding. Let them go. The scarred vampire looked shocked. The human was already scrambling backward. But, Seraphine continued, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, deliver a message for me. To Marcus Thane, to anyone else who thinks to collect a bounty on my head. Tell them that Seraphine Valdres has returned. Tell them I am not the broken thing that was taken from Valdres Keep 3 years ago. I am fire and vengeance and royal blood, and anyone who stands in my path to reclaiming what was stolen will learn exactly what it means to face a daughter of the oldest houses. She spread her wings fully, and in the morning light breaking over the hills, she looked like something from ancient legend, terrible and beautiful and utterly inhuman. Now run, she said. And pray we don't meet again. They ran. Ezran watched them disappear down the road, then turned to Seraphine. That was a choice. They were desperate, not evil. Desperation I understand. And the message you sent? Will spread faster than we can travel. Seraphine's expression was calculating now, strategic. If Marcus Thane knows I'm coming and is spreading that information, then stealth has already failed. So we change approaches. We don't sneak into Ravencross. We arrive. That's dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous, Ezran. But if we're going to survive, we need allies. And allies require respect. Respect requires demonstration of strength. She gestured toward the road where their attackers had fled. I just provided that demonstration. Ezran had to admit the logic was sound, if terrifying. You're starting to sound like a princess again. I am remembering how to be one. Her expression softened slightly. Is that a problem? No, Ezran said. It's necessary. But don't lose the part of you that chose mercy just now. That's the part worth saving. They continued north, moving faster now that concealment was no longer the primary strategy. The landscape transitioned from rocky borderlands to the beginning of proper Valdres territory, ancient forests of black pine, valleys where mist pooled like spilled milk, and roads that bore the marks of centuries of vampire civilization. They saw signs of recent conflict. Burned farmsteads. Abandoned villages. Corpses left hanging from trees as warnings, their flesh already picked clean by scavengers. Someone was consolidating power through terror, and Ezran didn't need to guess who. Morgana's work? He asked, nodding toward a particularly gruesome display. Yes. Seraphine's voice was hollow. She learned from our father. He believed that fear was the most honest form of loyalty. And your mother? My mother believed that loyalty earned through respect endures longer than loyalty enforced through terror. But her way is slower, gentler. In a world of monsters, gentleness is often seen as weakness. They made camp as evening approached, finding a defensible position in a cave system that showed signs of previous habitation. Ezran built a small fire while Seraphine scouted the perimeter, her vampiric senses far better suited to detecting threats in darkness. When she returned, he'd managed to heat some preserved rations and brew tea from herbs he'd gathered earlier. I still don't understand you, Seraphine said, settling near the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the elegant architecture of her features. What's to understand? Why you're doing this, truly. You could have left me in Velmarch. Could have parted ways in Greymark. Could have surrendered me to those bounty hunters today and walked away with gold in your pocket and no enemies hunting you. She met his eyes across the fire. Why stay? Why help me? Ezran poured tea, handed her a cup even though she didn't need it. She accepted anyway, wrapping her hands around the warmth. I told you about Thornhaven, he said finally. About the vampire lord who destroyed my village. What I didn't tell you was that I spent 10 years hating. Pure, absolute hatred for anything vampire. I killed them whenever I could, justified it as justice or survival or holy work. He stared into the fire, seeing old ghosts. Then I met someone. A vampire named Lucien who'd spent a century trying to atone for the monster he'd been in his youth. He ran a sanctuary for human refugees fleeing from worse situations than simple poverty. Fed them, protected them, asked nothing in return except that they be kind to each other. What happened to him? Human vampire hunters found the sanctuary. They didn't care that Lucien was saving lives. They only saw a vampire. They killed everyone, Lucien, the refugees, even the children. Burned it all. Ezran's hands tightened around his cup. I arrived the day after. Found the ashes. Found the bodies. Found proof that hatred is a poison that destroys indiscriminately. And that changed you. That woke me up. Made me realize that if I kept feeding my hatred, I'd become exactly like the ones who destroyed Thornhaven. So I chose differently. I chose to help where I could, to judge beings by their actions rather than their nature, to be the kind of person that Lucien had been. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and contemplative. You would have liked him, Ezran added. Lucien. He had your sense of honor. I hope I can live up to that comparison. Seraphine sipped the tea, made a face. This is terrible. It's medicinal. It's punishment. Despite everything, the danger, the exhaustion, the uncertain future, they both laughed. It was a small moment of lightness in the encompassing darkness, and it felt precious because of that. Tomorrow we reach Ravencross, Seraphine said. And then we'll know if Marcus Thane is enemy or potential ally. And if he's an enemy? Her smile was sharp as broken glass. Then he'll learn why betraying House Valdris is a fatal mistake. They took turns sleeping, one always on watch. During his watch, Ezran studied Seraphine where she rested near the fire. She didn't sleep the way humans did. It was more like meditation, her body perfectly still, her breathing nearly imperceptible. But even in repose, there was something regal about her, an aura of suppressed power that no amount of suffering had managed to extinguish. She'd been broken, he realized, but not destroyed. And the rebuilding was producing something stronger than what had existed before. When dawn approached and they prepared to move, Seraphine turned to him. Whatever happens in Ravencross, whatever we find there, thank you. For giving me the chance to fight back. For not leaving me to rot in obscurity. You don't need to thank me. I do. Because I've learned that gratitude, like mercy, is a choice. And I choose to give it to you. She extended her hand, not as a noble to a servant, but as an equal to an equal. Ezran took it. Ravencross clung to the side of a mountain like a barnacle to a ship's hull, precarious, stubborn, and impossibly enduring. The settlement had started life as a mining outpost centuries ago, then evolved into a waypoint for travelers navigating the treacherous passes between the lower territories and the heart of the Valdris domain. Now it was something else entirely, a nest of information brokers, assassins for hire, and anyone who profited from vampire political intrigue. The buildings were carved directly into the mountainside, connected by bridges and stairs that zigzagged at angles that defied comfortable navigation. Everything was built from the local black granite, giving the entire settlement a monochromatic appearance that blended seamlessly with the stone. Only the lights gave away habitation, warm yellow glows from windows, cold blue magical illumination marking important structures, and the occasional red lantern indicating establishments best avoided by the faint of heart. Ezran and Seraphine approached at dusk, timing their arrival for the transition period when neither day nor night held full dominion. Marcus Thane's establishment is in the central tier, Ezran said, consulting information Kellen had provided. A place called the Raven's Nest. Subtle. Information brokers rarely are, Seraphine observed. She donned her cloak again but made no effort to suppress her aura. As they'd discussed, stealth was no longer the strategy. Presence was. They ascended the main stairs, a winding path carved with handrails that had been worn smooth by centuries of use. Vampires and humans moved past them, giving Seraphine's obvious nature only cursory glances. In Ravencross, everyone had secrets. Prying was bad for business and often bad for health. The Raven's Nest occupied a prominent position overlooking the lower tiers. Its entrance was marked by a carved sign depicting a raven clutching a scroll in its talons. Subtle as a warhammer, Ezrin thought. They entered. The interior was surprisingly refined, polished wood, comfortable seating arrangements, walls lined with books that actually appeared to be read rather than merely decorative. A bar ran along one side where a bored-looking bartender polished glasses with mechanical precision. The clientele was mixed. A pair of vampires in expensive clothing played chess in one corner, a human woman read by candlelight near the window, and several other patrons occupied the space with the careful distance of people who didn't want to be noticed. A well-dressed man approached immediately. He was human, middle-aged, with the kind of unremarkable features that would be instantly forgettable if not for his eyes, sharp, calculating, missing nothing. "Welcome to the Raven's Nest," he said smoothly. "I'm Marcus Thane. How may I be of service?" "So much for introductions." Ezrin withdrew Kellen's sealed letter and offered it. "Magister Kellen suggested you might be able to help us locate someone." Thane took the letter but didn't open it, merely weighed it in his hand as if he could divine its contents through touch. His gaze shifted to Seraphine, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, calculation, possibly fear. "The letter won't be necessary," Thane said quietly. "I know who you are, Princess. The question is whether you know who I am." Seraphine's posture shifted subtly, became more predatory. "You're the man who sent bounty hunters after me this morning. I'm the man who ensured those bounty hunters were incompetent enough that you could easily defeat them and send a message." Thane finally broke the seal on Kellen's letter, scanned it briefly, then tucked it into his jacket. "Please come upstairs. My private office. We have much to discuss, and walls here have both ears and memories." Ezrin and Seraphine exchanged glances. Could be a trap. Likely was a trap. But they needed information more than they needed safety. "Lead on," Ezrin said. Thane's office was accessed through a hidden door behind one of the bookshelves, because of course it was. The room beyond was smaller than the main floor but far more personal. Maps covered every wall, marked with pins and notations in multiple languages. A desk dominated the center, its surface buried under correspondence, ledgers, and what appeared to be magical tracking devices. Thane gestured for them to sit, then poured 3 glasses of wine from a crystal decanter. He pushed 2 across the desk before settling into his own chair. "I'm going to be direct," Thane said, "because I suspect you appreciate directness and because time is a commodity we all lack. Seraphine Valdris, you disappeared 3 years ago. Your family claimed you were on an extended diplomatic mission. The truth, which I discovered through considerable expense and no small risk, was that you were betrayed by your sister, enslaved and trafficked through the black markets. And you did nothing with this information?" Seraphine's voice could have cut steel. "I did nothing because I couldn't afford to. Morgana Valdris has spies everywhere, resources beyond counting, and absolutely no compunction about killing anyone who threatens her ascension. If I had revealed your location, she would have had you executed and me with you. So instead you waited," Ezrin said. "Waited for what, exactly?" "For the moment when the value of revealing your location outweighed the risk." Thane sipped his wine. "That moment came when you walked free into Greymark, accompanied by a human who has a reputation for being both honorable and dangerously competent. At that point, I had a choice. Continue hiding what I knew and risk Morgana discovering that I'd been sitting on vital intelligence, or help you reach your mother and potentially earn the favor of the rightful heir to House Valdris. So the bounty hunters were a test. And a message. I needed to know if you were the broken slave that rumors suggested, or the princess I remembered from before your disappearance. You answered that question quite emphatically." Thane set down his glass. "You're still dangerous, still powerful, still royal in all the ways that matter. That makes you an investment worth making. Seraphine leaned forward. And what does this investment require? That you survive. That you reach your mother. That you reclaim your position and, when the time comes, that you remember who helped you when you needed it most. Thane pulled a map from his desk drawer and unrolled it. Commander Theron is here in a safe house 3 miles north of Raven Cross. He's been living under an assumed identity, working as a weapons master for a local merchant house. Your sister doesn't know he survived her purges. How do you know? Ezran asked. Because I'm the one who helped fake his death. Thane pointed to various locations on the map. When Morgana began her consolidation of power, I reached out to several key loyalists and offered them an option. Disappear completely or die trying to fight alone. Theron was smart enough to take the offer. He's been waiting, watching, hoping for any sign that you still lived. Seraphine studied the map with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every detail. Can he get us into Valdres Keep? Yes and no. The keep is heavily guarded, and Morgana has changed many of the security protocols. But Theron knows the old ways, tunnels, passages, routes that predate even your sister's paranoia. If anyone can get you to your mother alive, it's him. What's your price for this help? Ezran asked. Nobody gives information this valuable without expecting something in return. Thane smiled thinly. Smart. My price is simple. When Princess Seraphine reclaims her position, assuming she does, I want formal recognition as an information broker under House Valdres protection. No more hiding, no more worrying about which vampire lord might decide my services are too dangerous to tolerate. I want legitimacy. Done, Seraphine said immediately. Just like that. Thane seemed surprised. Just like that. If your information proves accurate, if Commander Theron is where you say he is and helps us reach my mother, then you'll have your legitimacy. Seraphine stood, projecting an authority that filled the small room. But if this is a betrayal, if we walk into a trap, I will personally ensure that you learn why my house has survived for millennia while others have crumbled to dust. I would expect nothing less, Princess. Thane stood as well, offering a formal bow. The safe house is marked on this map. Approach from the eastern path. There are wards against magical detection on the other sides. The password is Silver Dawn. Theron will recognize it. Ezran took the map, folding it carefully. Is there anything else we should know? Yes. Thane's expression turned grave. Your sister is aware that you've surfaced. She doesn't know your exact location yet, but her hunters are scouring the territories. She's offering a fortune for your capture. Alive if possible, dead if necessary. And she's deployed something else, something I've only heard whispers about. A hunter called the Bloodless. If even half the rumors are true, it's concerning. What is it? Seraphine asked. A creature crafted specifically to kill vampires. Your sister commissioned it from a rogue blood sorcerer. Something that can track vampire bloodlines that doesn't tire or fear or feel mercy. It's supposed to be unstoppable. Everything can be stopped, Ezran said. Perhaps. But I'd advise reaching your mother before that theory is tested. They left the Raven's Nest as full darkness fell, the settlement transforming into a place of shadows and hushed conversations. Ezran could feel eyes tracking their movement, could sense the way information about their presence was already spreading through the networks that Thane controlled. Do you trust him? Seraphine asked once they were beyond easy hearing. I trust that his motivations align with ours for now. That's enough. They made their way north using Thane's map, following paths that wound through the most isolated sections of the mountain settlement. The safe house was located in a natural cavern system that had been expanded and fortified, its entrance concealed by illusion magic that would have fooled anyone without specific knowledge of what to look for. Ezran found the markers Thane had indicated, 3 stones arranged in a specific pattern, and spoke the password, Silver Dawn. The illusion shimmered and dissolved, revealing a reinforced door. It opened before they could knock. The vampire who stood in the doorway was tall and imposing even by vampire standards, his frame carrying the kind of muscle that came from centuries of weapons training. He wore simple clothes, but Ezran recognized quality in the cut and material. His face was hard, lined with the kind of scars that spoke of battles survived rather than avoided, and his eyes, pale gold, unusual for vampires, fixed on Seraphine with an intensity that bordered on religious fervor. "Seraphine," he breathed. "By all the old blood, it's truly you. Commander Theron." Seraphine's voice cracked just slightly. I wasn't certain you'd survived." "I could say the same, Princess." Theron stepped aside, gesturing them in. "Please quickly. The wards here are strong but not impenetrable." The interior of the safe house was sparse but functional. Weapons racked on the walls, a simple living space, and maps that echoed the ones in Thane's office. This was the dwelling of a soldier waiting for a war that might never come. Theron sealed the door behind them, activating additional wards that made Ezran's skin prickle with their intensity. Then he turned to Seraphine and, to Ezran's surprise, dropped to one knee. "My princess," Theron said formally, "I failed you. Failed to prevent your capture, failed to protect you as was my sworn duty. I have lived with that shame for 3 years. If you demand my life as forfeit, I will offer it freely. Stand up, Theron." Seraphine's voice was gentle but firm. "You failed nothing. I was betrayed by my own blood, by someone we all trusted. The blame belongs to Morgana, not to you." Theron rose, and Ezran saw wetness in the old warrior's eyes. "Your mother will weep when she learns you live. She has not been well, Princess. The grief of losing you broke something in her." "Then we need to reach her," Seraphine said. "Thane suggested you might know a way into Valdris Keep. A way that avoids Morgana's security." "I do." Theron moved to one of his maps, this one a detailed schematic of the keep itself. "Your sister controls the main gates, the guard rotations, the official passages. But she doesn't know about the Serpent's Path. Your grandfather commissioned it during the Shadow Wars, a secret route from the catacombs beneath the keep to an exit 3 miles distant. It was meant as an escape route if the keep ever fell to enemy forces." "I've never heard of it," Seraphine said. "Few have. Your mother knew, your grandfather obviously, and a handful of trusted advisors including myself. We kept it secret specifically for situations like this." Ezran studied the map. "If this path exists and is truly secret, it's our best option. But getting to the entrance will be the challenge. The entrance is hidden in the ruins of Old Valdris, the original settlement before the keep was built. The area is avoided, considered cursed by superstitious locals. That works in our favor. We can reach it without drawing attention." "And once we're inside?" Seraphine asked. "The path leads directly to my mother? To the royal wing. But Princess, you need to understand, the keep is not as you remember it. Your sister has transformed it into something darker. There are blood wards, binding circles, creatures in the lower levels that shouldn't exist. Even using the secret path, we'll need to be prepared for anything." Ezran felt the familiar weight of pre-mission tension settling over him. This was the moment when careful planning met chaotic reality, when every decision mattered and mistakes meant death. "When can we leave?" he asked. "Tonight if you're ready. The journey to Old Valdris will take 6 hours at a hard pace. We can be at the entrance by dawn." Seraphine and Ezran exchanged glances. They were both exhausted, running on determination and desperation more than actual reserves of strength. But every hour they delayed was another hour for Morgana's hunters to close in. "Tonight," Seraphine decided. "We go tonight." Theron nodded, already moving to gather supplies. "Then we prepare. Princess, you'll need proper armor. Human?" He looked at Ezran. "What weapons do you carry?" "Twin blades, throwing knives, and a healthy respect for not dying." A slight smile crossed Theron's scarred face. "That last one is the most important. Come, I have equipment that might save your life." They spent the next hour preparing. Theron outfitted Seraphine with armor that had been stored in the safe house, elegant but functional, designed to accommodate her wings while protecting vital areas. For Ezran, he provided enchanted leather armor that would resist minor magic and a set of alchemical grenades that could disrupt blood sorcery. "One more thing," Theron said, retrieving a small box from a locked chest. Inside was a pendant on a silver chain, the emblem of House Valdris rendered in perfect detail. "This belonged to your father, Princess. Your mother gave it to me before everything fell apart. She said if you ever returned you should have it. Seraphine took the pendant with trembling hands. She fastened it around her neck, and Ezrin saw her straighten, saw her shoulders square with renewed purpose. Let's bring her daughter home, Seraphine said. They left the safe house as midnight approached, 3 figures moving through darkness with purpose and precision. Theron led, his knowledge of the territory proving invaluable as he guided them along paths that avoided patrols and observation posts. Seraphine moved between them, her senses alert for any sign of pursuit. Ezrin brought up the rear, his attention split between their immediate surroundings and the larger patterns of threat that might emerge. The journey was tense but uneventful. They passed through wilderness that had returned to claim lands once cultivated, through forests where ancient trees whispered with voices that might have been wind or might have been something far older. The moon provided enough light for even Ezrin to navigate, and for the vampires it was bright as day. Old Valdris appeared as a collection of ruins just as dawn threatened the eastern horizon. Crumbling walls, collapsed towers, and foundations that had survived centuries but surrendered to entropy. It had the melancholy quality of all abandoned places, a reminder that even great civilizations eventually fade. There, Theron pointed to what appeared to be a collapsed cellar entrance. The Serpent's Path begins beneath that ruin. They descended carefully, Theron using magic to shift rubble that had sealed the entrance. Below was a passage carved from living rock, its walls marked with ancient runes that still glowed faintly with protective enchantments. Once we enter, Theron said, we'll be committed. The path is one way, collapse the entrance behind us to prevent pursuit, proceed forward to the keep. There's no turning back. I'm aware, Seraphine said. Commander, I'm ready. Ezrin? Ezrin thought about Thornhaven, about Lucian's sanctuary, about all the choices that had led him to this moment. Standing in vampire ruins, about to infiltrate an enemy fortress to help a princess reclaim her throne. It was absurd. It was dangerous. It was exactly where he was supposed to be. Ready, he said. They entered the Serpent's Path, and Theron sealed the entrance behind them with a word of power that brought tons of stone crashing down. The sound echoed through the passage like thunder, like the closing of fate's door. There was only forward now. The passage descended in a slow spiral, carved with precision that spoke of master craftsmen working with both mundane tools and magical enhancement. The walls were lined with crystalline formations that emitted a soft blue luminescence, not bright enough to be comfortable for human eyes, but sufficient to navigate by. Ezrin's breath misted in the cold air. This deep beneath the earth, the temperature never varied, trapped in eternal chill. They moved in silence, Theron leading with the confidence of someone following a memorized path. Every 100 yards they passed alcoves carved into the walls, some empty, others containing ancient statues worn smooth by time. Guardian spirits, Ezrin realized, watchers meant to protect the path from intrusion. These runes, Seraphine said softly, running her fingers along the wall carvings. I recognize the style. My grandfather's work. He was a master of blood sorcery before such magic became taboo. The path is protected by those enchantments, Theron confirmed. Any vampire not of Valdris blood attempting to traverse it would trigger defenses that would collapse the entire tunnel. Your grandfather was thorough in his paranoia. Paranoia that may save us now, Ezrin observed. They descended for what felt like hours, the passage occasionally branching but Theron never hesitating at the junctions. The air grew heavier, thick with ancient magic and the weight of stone above them. Ezrin's soldier instinct screamed at the vulnerability of their position. Trapped underground, no escape routes, completely dependent on their guide's knowledge. Trust, he reminded himself. Sometimes survival required trusting people who could destroy you. They reached a chamber where the passage widened into a small cavern. Water dripped from stalactites overhead, forming pools that reflected the blue luminescence in fractal patterns. In the center of the chamber stood a stone door carved with intricate designs, the sigil of House Valdris prominent among them. This is the first seal, Theron said. Princess, it requires your blood to open. Seraphine approached without hesitation. She pricked her finger with one elongated claw and pressed her hand against the door's center. The sigils flared crimson, power recognizing bloodline, and the door swung inward with the grinding sound of mechanisms that hadn't moved in decades. Beyond was another passage, narrower than before, the walls closing in uncomfortably. They proceeded single file now, and Ezrin had to suppress his rising claustrophobia. This was a passage designed for desperation, not comfort, a last resort for royalty fleeing catastrophe. "Commander," Seraphine said quietly, "tell me about my mother. How she has fared in my absence." Theron was silent for several steps. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of witnessed suffering. "Lady Alara aged in ways vampires should not age, Princess. The grief of losing you, believing you dead despite your sister's lies about diplomatic missions, it broke something fundamental in her. She withdrew from court, delegated more and more authority to Morgana. She stopped feeding regularly, stopped maintaining her power. Some nights, I stood guard outside her chambers and heard her weeping." Seraphine's hand pressed against the passage wall, her control momentarily slipping. "And Morgana took advantage. Ruthlessly. She consolidated power, eliminated rivals, brought in her own people. Blood sorcerers, shadow weavers, creatures loyal only to her. By the time some of us realized what was happening, it was too late. Morgana controlled the guard, the treasury, the administrative functions. Your mother remained on the throne, but it was Morgana who ruled. Why didn't Mother stop her? I believe," Theron said carefully, "that Lady Alara no longer cared. With you gone, with her grief consuming her, the throne became meaningless. She let Morgana have it in all but name. Then we changed that." Seraphine's voice hardened. "We remind my mother that she still has a daughter, that the fight isn't over, that Morgana's treachery cannot be allowed to stand." They reached a second seal, this one more complex than the first. It required not just blood but a spoken phrase in the old vampire tongue. Seraphine provided both, and the door opened onto a chamber that took Ezrin's breath away. The room was circular, its walls covered entirely in carved reliefs depicting the history of House Valdris. Battles, coronations, great works of magic and diplomacy, centuries of history rendered in stone. But what dominated the chamber was the pool in its center, filled with liquid that gleamed like liquid silver and smelled of ozone and old blood. "The pool of remembrance," Theron said. "Your grandfather created it as a test. Anyone who wishes to proceed must drink from the pool and prove their loyalty to House Valdris through memory and truth. It's a final safeguard, ensuring that only those truly committed to protecting the house can reach the keep." "What happens if you fail the test?" Ezrin asked. "The pool's magic destroys your mind, leaves you a hollow shell. It's not designed to kill, but what remains after failure is not life." Seraphine approached the pool, staring into its reflective surface. Ezrin saw her face mirrored there, saw the weight of what she was about to risk. "Princess," Theron said, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Seraphine knelt beside the pool. "If I'm to reclaim my position, I must prove I'm worthy of it. Not just by blood but by character." She cupped her hands, drew up a measure of the liquid and drank. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Seraphine's eyes rolled back, her body going rigid as magic seized her consciousness. Ezrin started forward, but Theron caught his arm. "You can't help her," the commander said. "This is her trial to face." Ezrin watched helplessly as Seraphine trembled, watched as the liquid in the pool began to glow, watched as something ineffable passed between the ancient magic and the princess who'd come to reclaim her heritage. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time felt elastic in the underground chamber, stretched and compressed by forces beyond normal perception. Then Seraphine gasped, drawing a shuddering breath. Her eyes snapped open, still glowing crimson but with a new intensity, as if she'd looked into the heart of something profound and returned changed. "I saw them," she whispered. "All of them. Every ancestor, every bearer of the Valdris name. I felt their memories, their triumphs and failures, their hopes and fears." She looked up at Ezrin and Theron with eyes that held centuries of accumulated wisdom. "And they judged me worthy." The pool's glow intensified, and a section of wall behind it swung open silently, revealing the final passage. "Then we continue," Theron said, helping Seraphine to her feet. "The keep lies beyond. Stay close, stay silent, and if fighting begins, protect the princess above all else." "I can protect myself," Seraphine said, but there was gratitude in her tone. "Nevertheless," Theron replied with a slight smile. They entered the final passage and immediately Ezran felt the change. The air was warmer here, no longer the dead chill of deep earth but something that spoke of proximity to inhabited spaces. He could hear sounds, faint and distant but definitely sounds. Voices perhaps. The clang of metal. "What?" Theron held up a hand, signaling for quiet. They proceeded with extreme caution now, every step measured, every breath controlled. The passage began to slope upward, and Ezran's mental map suggested they were ascending toward the foundations of the keep itself. They reached a final door, this one made of plain stone with no visible mechanism. Theron pressed his hand against it in a specific pattern, and it swung inward. Beyond was a small chamber that appeared to be a storage room, crates, barrels, supplies stacked in organized chaos. But more importantly, a staircase leading upward, and through the ceiling the sound of footsteps and conversation. "The servant passages," Theron whispered. "They'll take us to the royal wing. But from here forward we're inside enemy territory. Morgana's people patrol these halls. One wrong encounter, one raised alarm, and we'll have the entire keep coming down on us." "How far to my mother?" Seraphine asked. 3 levels up, through the central passages, then the royal corridor. Under normal circumstances perhaps 20 minutes. With stealth required? Theron shrugged. "However long it takes." Ezran checked his weapons, made certain everything was secure. "Then let's not waste time." They ascended the staircase, Theron opening the door at the top just enough to peer through. He signaled clear, and they emerged into a servant corridor, narrow, dim, designed for the staff who kept the keep functioning but were not meant to be seen. The architecture was impressive even in these utilitarian spaces. Valdris Keep had been built over centuries, each generation adding to the structure, creating a labyrinthine complex that was part fortress, part palace, part arcane repository. The walls here were plain stone, but Ezran could see the quality of construction, the attention to detail that spoke of genuine craftsmanship. They moved through the passages using a combination of Theron's knowledge and careful observation. Twice they had to duck into alcoves as servants passed. Once they heard guards approaching and spent tense minutes pressed against a wall, concealed by a minor illusion spell Theron wove with whispered words and precise gestures. They ascended another level, then another. The architecture grew richer, tapestries appearing on walls, carpets muffling footsteps, crystal sconces providing warm light. They were entering the inhabited sections of the keep now, the areas where nobility dwelt and political power was exercised. Theron led them through a particularly complex series of turns, then stopped abruptly at an intersection. He held up a clenched fist. "Danger." Voices approached from ahead. Not servants, not guards. Something else. The tone was formal, authoritative, discussing matters of state with the casual confidence of those who wielded real power. "The hunters should return within the day," a female voice was saying. "They've picked up a trail leading north. If the princess is truly alive, we'll have confirmation soon." "And if she is?" A second voice, male, cultured. "Then we eliminate her. Permanently this time. No slavery, no half measures. The bloodless is already deployed. It will find her, kill her, and bring proof." Ezran felt Seraphine tense beside him. That first voice, she recognized it. "Morgana," Seraphine breathed, barely audible. Theron's expression turned grim. He gestured frantically, "We need to hide now." But there was nowhere to go. The corridor behind them had servants approaching. The intersection ahead had Morgana and her companion, and the only door nearby was sealed with magic that would take time to break. They were trapped. Ezran's mind raced through options. Fighting was possible but would raise immediate alarm. Concealment might work if Theron's illusion magic was strong enough. Running would accomplish nothing but delay the inevitable. Then Seraphine made the decision for them. She stepped into the intersection, pulled back her hood, and let her full presence radiate, power unconstrained, authority absolute, a princess reclaiming her domain. "Hello, sister," Seraphine said. "We need to talk." Morgana Valdris was everything Seraphine was not. Sharp where Seraphine was elegant, calculated where Seraphine was passionate, and dressed in crimson and black that spoke of blood and shadow. She was taller than her sister, her features more angular, her eyes a darker shade of red that held no warmth whatsoever. Her wings, currently folded, were sleek and black as midnight, and power radiated from her like heat from a forge. The male vampire beside her, an advisor judging by his elaborate robes, went pale and began to back away. Morgana simply stared, her expression cycling through shock, fear, rage, and finally settling on something that might have been respect. "Seraphine," Morgana said, her voice controlled despite the circumstances. "You look remarkably alive for a corpse. Reports of my death were exaggerated. As you well know, since you're the one who arranged my disappearance." Arranged is such a harsh word. I prefer, facilitated a career change. Morgana's hand moved subtly and Ezran recognized the gesture. She was preparing magic, readying defenses or an attack. Theron and Ezran moved to flank Seraphine, weapons ready. The servant corridor behind them had gone silent. Apparently the staff had heard the confrontation and wisely decided to be elsewhere. "Don't be foolish, sister," Seraphine said. "You cannot fight all three of us here in a corridor without bringing the entire keep down on us. And that attention would require explanations you're not prepared to give." "Perhaps." Morgana's gaze flicked to Theron. "Commander Theron. I wondered what happened to you. A shame really, you were quite skilled. Wasted talent, loyalty to a failing regime." "Lady Alara remains my queen," Theron said flatly. "A queen in name only. I rule here, Commander. I rebuilt this house after my mother's grief nearly destroyed it. I made the hard choices, eliminated the weak, forged alliances that ensure our survival. What has Mother done except mourn?" "She mourned her murdered daughter," Seraphine said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "The daughter you sold into slavery after failing to kill her outright." "Murdered would have been kinder," Morgana admitted with shocking casualness. "But I needed you erased, not martyred. A dead princess becomes a rallying point. A vanished one becomes a mystery, then a rumor, then forgotten. It was the strategic choice. It was evil. Evil is a luxury we cannot afford, Seraphine. You always were too soft, too idealistic. You would have run this house into the ground with your notions of mercy and diplomacy. I saved us." Ezran had been watching the male advisor during this exchange. The vampire was slowly edging away, preparing to flee and raise alarm. Ezran shifted his stance infinitesimally, preparing to intercept. "You didn't save anything," Seraphine said. "You built a regime of fear and cruelty. Tell me, sister, how many of our own people have you killed in your purges? How many loyal servants died because they questioned your methods?" "As many as necessary." Morgana's expression hardened. "And I'll kill as many more as needed to protect what I've built. Including you." She struck. Morgana's magic was faster than Ezran had anticipated, blood sorcery woven with shadow magic, creating tendrils of darkness that lashed toward Seraphine with lethal intent. But Seraphine was ready. Her own power flared, creating a barrier of crimson light that shattered the attack into dispersing fragments. The counterattack was immediate and overwhelming. Seraphine surged forward with speed that made Ezran's eyes water, covering the distance to her sister in a heartbeat. They collided in a fury of claws and magic, two vampire princesses unleashing centuries of inherited power in the confines of a palace corridor. Ezran turned his attention to the advisor, who had indeed bolted. Ezran's throwing knife caught the vampire in the leg, sending him sprawling with a cry of pain. Theron was there instantly, knocking the advisor unconscious with the pommel of his sword. "We need to move," Theron said urgently. "This fight will draw attention." But the sisters were locked in combat that seemed too intense to interrupt. They fought with the intimacy of people who knew each other's every move, who trained together, played together, lived together before betrayal turned love to hatred. Morgana's shadow magic created weapons of solidified darkness. Seraphine's blood sorcery turned her very essence into offensive capability. The corridor was being destroyed around them. Walls cracked, tapestries burst into flame from errant magic, and the floor itself buckled under the pressure of their combined power. "Seraphine!" Ezrin shouted. "Your mother. We need to reach her." For a moment he thought Seraphine hadn't heard. Then she disengaged, using her wings to propel herself backward, putting distance between herself and Morgana. "This ends today," Seraphine said, breathing hard. "But not here. I'm going to Mother and I'm going to tell her everything. Your treachery, your crimes, everything you've done. And then she will judge you as is her right." Morgana laughed, a sound without humor. "You think she'll believe you? You think she'll choose you over me, after I've been the one keeping this house alive while she wallowed in grief? You're a ghost, Seraphine. A memory. I'm the future. Then let's see what the past has to say about your future." Seraphine turned and ran, not in retreat but in purpose. Theron and Ezrin followed immediately, leaving Morgana standing in the destroyed corridor. Behind them, Ezrin heard Morgana shout orders. Guards summoned, alarms raised, the keep mobilizing to stop them. "The royal wing now," Theron urged, taking the lead again. They sprinted through corridors that were no longer empty, past servants who pressed against walls in shock, past guards who were too surprised to react before they'd already passed. They ascended a grand staircase, burst through a set of ornate doors, and found themselves in a corridor that could only belong to royalty. Everything here was opulent, artwork worth fortunes, carpets that whispered underfoot, walls inlaid with precious materials. And at the end of the corridor, a set of doors flanked by two guards in elaborate armor. The royal chambers. The guards moved to block their approach, but Theron barked something in a language Ezrin didn't recognize. A command phrase, perhaps, or an invocation of old authority. The guards hesitated, clearly confused, and in that moment Seraphine swept past them. She threw open the doors. The chamber beyond was vast and shadowed, heavy curtains blocking most light. A massive canopied bed dominated the space, and in it, a figure so still that Ezrin initially thought they'd arrived too late. But then the figure moved. Slowly, painfully, an ancient vampire sat up in the bed. Lady Ilara Valdris looked like she'd been carved from pale marble and left to weather for centuries. Her hair was silver white, her skin translucent enough to show the veins beneath, and her eyes, once powerful and commanding, were now dim with grief and exhaustion. She wore a simple nightgown, and the blood-thrown sigil on a chain around her neck seemed too heavy for her frail frame. She stared at Seraphine with those dimmed eyes, and for a long moment, there was no recognition. Then something shifted. Memory perhaps. Or hope. "Seraphine?" Lady Ilara's voice was barely a whisper. "Is that truly you, or has my grief finally driven me to madness?" "It's me, Mother." Seraphine crossed the chamber, falling to her knees beside the bed. "I'm alive. I'm here. I'm home." Lady Ilara's hand, trembling, skeletal, reached out to touch Seraphine's face. Traced her cheekbones, her jaw, confirming reality through touch. 3 years, Ilara whispered. 3 years I've mourned you. They told me you were on a diplomatic mission. Then that you'd been killed by bandits. Then nothing. Just absence. Morgana betrayed me. Had me enslaved, sold, erased. She wanted me gone so she could take your throne. Ilara's eyes sharpened, clarity returning like dawn breaking through clouds. Morgana did this? Yes. And she's been ruling in your name while you grieved. Consolidating power, eliminating opposition, preparing to formally claim the throne. The doors burst open. Morgana entered with a dozen guards, her expression thunderous. But she stopped when she saw the tableau. Her mother sitting up in bed, actually present and aware for the first time in years, with Seraphine kneeling beside her. "Mother," Morgana said carefully, "I'm glad to see you awake. But you need to understand, this creature claiming to be Seraphine is an imposter. A spy sent to destabilize our house. I've been trying to apprehend her, but she's proven quite slippery." "An imposter?" Ilara's voice, while still weak, carried an edge that Ezrin recognized. This was a queen awakening after a long sleep. "You claim this is not my daughter?" She cannot be. Seraphine is dead. I have reports, evidence. Evidence you manufactured. Seraphine rose to her feet. Evidence created to hide your crime. But Mother knows me. Look at her eyes, Morgana. She recognizes her own blood. Ilara was indeed staring at Seraphine with an intensity that seemed to drain years from her face. She reached out again, this time pulling Seraphine's hand to her chest, over her heart. I feel your truth, Ilara said. Feel the blood we share, the lineage that cannot be faked or forged. This is my daughter. This is Seraphine. Morgana's composure cracked. Mother, she's been gone for 3 years. She could be anyone, anything, compelled, controlled, transformed. Then let us test that. Ilara's other hand moved to the sigil around her neck, grasping it firmly. The blood throne recognizes its own. If she is truly my daughter, the throne will acknowledge her. If she is an impostor, it will reject her violently. Ilara removed the chain and held it toward Seraphine. The sigil began to glow, power building in it like a gathering storm. Take it, Ilara commanded. Claim your birthright. Seraphine grasped the sigil. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then light exploded from the sigil. Not the crimson of blood magic but pure white, the kind of light that banishes all shadow and leaves only truth. It washed over Seraphine, through her, interrogating every part of her being with relentless thoroughness. The light faded. Seraphine remained standing, the sigil glowing gently in her hand. The throne has spoken, Ilara said, and her voice now carried the full weight of centuries of authority. This is Seraphine Valdris, my daughter, my heir, and third in line to the blood throne. And if what she claims is true, if you, she looked at Morgana with eyes that had gone from grief dim to steel sharp, betrayed your own blood, orchestrated your sister's disappearance, and usurped my authority while I was weakened. Morgana's expression twisted into something ugly. I saved this house. I rebuilt what your weakness nearly destroyed. You were dying of grief while our enemies circled. I did what was necessary. You did what was ambitious. Ilara rose from the bed, and despite her weakened state, despite 3 years of deterioration, she was suddenly every inch a queen. You saw an opportunity and took it. But you forgot the first law of House Valdris. We protect our own. Always. Mother. Silence. The command was absolute. Guards, restrain Princess Morgana. She is to be confined to her chambers pending formal investigation of these accusations. Any who refuse this order declare themselves in rebellion against the blood throne. The guards hesitated, torn between Morgana's more recent authority and Ilara's traditional power. Then one by one they moved to Morgana's side, but not in her defense. In restraint. Morgana didn't resist. She was too smart for feudal violence. Instead, she fixed Seraphine with a look of pure hatred. This isn't over, Morgana said. You may have returned, may have reclaimed Mother's favor, but you're still weak. Still idealistic. Still soft. When they come for us, and they will come, you'll remember that I was the strong one. And you'll wish you'd let me rule. Perhaps, Seraphine said. But strength without honor is just cruelty. And cruelty is a weakness of its own. The guards escorted Morgana from the chamber. When the doors closed, the silence was profound. Ilara swayed, her burst of strength exhausted. Seraphine caught her, helped her back to the bed. Rest, Mother. You've been ill too long. I've been absent too long, Ilara corrected. But you're home now. And that gives me reason to live again. She reached up, touching Seraphine's face one more time. Tell me everything. Every moment of the last 3 years. I want to know who you became in the darkness. I will. But first, Seraphine gestured to Ezran and Theron, who'd remained respectfully back during the reunion. There are others who deserve recognition. Commander Theron, who survived and waited. And Ezran Talmir, who freed me when he had no reason to, who helped me return when he could have simply walked away. Ilara's gaze fell on Ezran, and he felt the weight of it. Centuries of accumulated wisdom and power, studying him with uncomfortable intensity. A human, Ilara observed. Helped my daughter out of simple decency? Something like that, Your Majesty, Ezran said. Interesting. Ilara smiled, and for a moment, Ezran saw the beauty and power that had once defined her. Very interesting indeed. We will speak more later, Ezran Talmir. House Valdris owes you a debt that cannot be easily repaid. I don't need repayment. Which is precisely why you'll receive it. The next 3 days were controlled chaos. Lady Ilara, rejuvenated by her daughter's return and the need to restore order, threw herself into rulership with an energy that shocked those who'd watched her decline. She fed properly for the first time in years, met with advisors, reviewed documents, and began the delicate process of unwinding Morgana's web of influence. The investigation into Morgana's activities was extensive and damning. Ezran, granted unusual access as an honored guest, watched as evidence mounted, executed rivals, embezzled funds, illegal alliances with rogue houses, and the undeniable proof that she'd orchestrated Seraphine's kidnapping and sale into slavery. The sentence, when it came, was exile rather than execution. Despite everything, Ilara couldn't bring herself to kill her own daughter. Morgana was stripped of all titles, all property, all connection to House Valdris. She was given 1 day to leave the territory with the promise that return meant death. Ezran saw Morgana once more before she departed, escorted by guards to the territory border. She looked diminished in travel clothes, her elaborate court attire replaced by simple garments. But her eyes still burned with ambition. "This won't last," Morgana said as she passed him in the corridor. "My sister is too weak. Mother is too old. House Valdris will fall, and when it does, I'll be there to reclaim what should have been mine." "Maybe," Ezran replied. "Or maybe you'll learn that strength isn't the only virtue worth having." Morgana laughed bitterly and departed. Seraphine spent those days relearning her home, reconnecting with servants and advisors who remembered her, slowly stepping back into the role she'd been torn from. Ezran watched her transformation with quiet admiration. The slave he'd freed in Velmarch was gone, replaced by a princess who wielded authority with grace and purpose. On the 4th day, Ilara summoned Ezran to her private study. The room was smaller than he'd expected, more personal. Books lined the walls, maps covered every surface, and a single portrait dominated the space. A younger Ilara with 2 daughters, all 3 smiling, taken in a time before betrayal had shattered the family. "Ezran Talmir," Ilara said, gesturing for him to sit. "I've spent days trying to determine how to properly thank you. Gold seems insufficient. Land would be meaningless to someone who travels as you do. A title would only burden you. Your Majesty, I don't need thanks. Nevertheless, you'll receive it." Ilara withdrew a small box from her desk. Inside was a ring, simple silver but marked with the sigil of House Valdris. "This is a seal ring. It grants you status as a friend of the house, able to call upon our resources and protection anywhere our influence reaches. More importantly, it identifies you as someone under our direct protection. Anyone who harms you harms House Valdris." Ezran accepted the ring, weighing it in his palm. "This is considerable. It's a fraction of what you're owed." Ilara's expression softened. "You gave me back my daughter. There is no repayment for that, only acknowledgement and eternal gratitude. I did what anyone decent would do. Precisely why you'll never understand how rare you are." Ilara stood, moving to the window that overlooked the keep's grounds. "I've lived 600 years, Ezran. I've watched empires rise and fall, seen heroes become monsters and monsters discover redemption. In all that time I've learned that the measure of a being isn't their species or their power, it's the choices they make when no one is watching." She turned to face him. "You chose decency when cruelty would have been easier. You chose loyalty when abandonment would have been safer. You are, in the truest sense, a good man. Don't lose that. The world needs more of it than you could possibly know." Ezran felt heat in his face, embarrassment at the praise but also something deeper. Recognition, perhaps. Validation from someone who'd lived long enough to make such judgments meaningfully. "I'll try," he said simply. "That's all any of us can do." They spoke for another hour, about his travels, about the state of the borderlands, about the delicate balance between vampire and human territories. Ilara was genuinely interested, asking questions that showed she understood the complexities of the world beyond her keep. Finally, as afternoon light slanted through the windows, Elara said, "You're planning to leave soon." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Ezrin confirmed. "I'm not suited to court life. And there are always people who need help in the borderlands. Seraphine will be disappointed. She's grown fond of you." Ezrin didn't know how to respond to that. Elara smiled. "Don't worry, I'm not suggesting anything dramatic. But my daughter has spent 3 years as property, as something used and discarded. You showed her that honor still exists. That matters more than you know." "She's stronger than she realizes," Ezrin said. "She'll rebuild. She'll thrive." "I believe so. Thanks in part to you." Ezrin found Seraphine in the keep's garden that evening. It was a strange place, cultivated to thrive in perpetual twilight, filled with night-blooming flowers and plants that needed little sun. She stood beside a fountain, watching water cascade over carved stone that depicted ancient Valdris victories. "I hear you're leaving," she said without turning. "Word travels fast. Mother told me. She said you'd decided to return to the borderlands." Now Seraphine did turn, and Ezrin saw complex emotions playing across her face. "I was hoping you might stay. Not permanently, perhaps, but longer." "I'm not a courtier, Seraphine. I don't belong in places like this." "No, but you belong in my life." She crossed to him, her movements carrying the grace that was now effortless. "You freed me when you had no obligation. You protected me when you had no investment. You helped me reclaim everything I'd lost. How do I simply let you walk away? You don't let me. I choose to go just as I chose to help. But that doesn't mean we won't see each other again." Seraphine smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "The borderlands are vast. The odds of crossing paths again are better than you'd think. I have a habit of being exactly where I'm needed." Ezrin withdrew the ring Elara had given him. "And I'm under House Valdris protection now. Something tells me your house will find ways to call in that particular connection." "You'd come if I called?" "Yes." The word hung between them, simple and absolute. Seraphine stepped closer, and before Ezrin could react, she pulled him into an embrace. It was not romantic, not quite, but it was intimate in a way that went beyond physical touch. A connection forged through shared ordeal, mutual respect, and the rare understanding that sometimes people meet exactly when they're meant to. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For treating me like a person when I was property. For giving me the chance to become myself again." Ezrin returned the embrace, feeling the coolness of her skin, the strength in her frame, the faint thrumming of power that was her vampiric nature. "You did that yourself. I just opened a door. You walked through it." They stood that way for a long moment, two beings from different worlds who'd found common ground in the most unlikely circumstances. Finally, Seraphine stepped back. "When you're in the borderlands, when you encounter others like I was, broken, enslaved, erased, help them. Show them what you showed me. Be the reminder that decency still exists." "I will." "Then go with my blessing. And know that wherever you travel, whatever dangers you face, House Valdris remembers its debts and protects its friends." Ezrin left Valdris Keep the next morning, his pack replenished, his weapons maintained, and the seal ring on his finger. Commander Theron escorted him to the border, the old warrior having been restored to his position with full honors. "You changed history here," Theron said as they walked the last mile. "Without you, Morgana would rule, Elara would have faded, and Seraphine would have died in obscurity. The entire house owes you. I'm just glad it worked out." "So am I." Theron stopped at the border marker. "This is where I leave you. But Ezrin, if you ever need anything at all, send word. Commander Theron and the full might of Valdris military stand ready." They clasped forearms in the warrior's farewell, then Ezrin continued south, back into the borderlands that had always been his home. 6 months later, Ezrin stood in a slave market in a city he'd never heard of before, watching an auction with barely controlled rage. The borderlands never changed. The names of cities shifted, the faces of tyrants rotated, but the fundamental cruelties remained constant. People bought and sold like livestock, reduced to property, their lives measured only in value to others. But now Ezran had something he didn't have before. Resources. Authority. The seal ring on his finger that marked him as protected by one of the oldest vampire houses in existence. He bid on every slave in the market. Paid outrageous sums. Drew shocked stares and angry mutters from traders who realized they were being systematically bought out. When the auction ended and the slaves were transferred to his custody, 15 frightened beings, human and vampire both, Ezran gathered them in a locked room and began removing chains. "My name is Ezran Talmir," he said as they stared at him in confusion and dawning hope. "You're no longer slaves. You're free. I'm going to help you get somewhere safe, help you rebuild your lives, and all I ask in return is that when you're strong again, you do the same for someone else." One of them, a young vampire woman with scars that spoke of years of abuse, whispered, "Why? Why do this?" Ezran thought of Seraphine, of Lucian, of Thornhaven and all the losses that had shaped him, and all the choices that had defined him. "Because someone once showed me that decency still exists," he said. "And I'm determined to prove that lesson true." In Valdris Keep, Seraphine sat in council with her mother and the house advisors, helping rebuild what Morgana had damaged. She wore the seal of her position with pride, spoke with authority earned through suffering, and ruled with a combination of strength and mercy that reminded old-timers of Alara in her prime. And sometimes, late at night, she'd touch the pendant her father had left her and think of a human warrior who'd freed her from chains and in doing so, freed her from far more than simple captivity. "Thank you," she'd whisper to the darkness, knowing he couldn't hear but needing to say it anyway. "Thank you for reminding me who I was meant to be." Somewhere in the borderlands, Ezran continued his work. Freeing slaves. Helping the desperate. Fighting when necessary, showing mercy when possible, and always choosing decency over expedience. Because monsters weren't defined by their species. They were defined by their choices. And Ezran Talmir had chosen long ago what kind of man he would be. The road stretched before him, endless and uncertain. But he walked it with purpose, with honor, and with the knowledge that every small act of kindness was a rebellion against the darkness. That was enough. That would always be enough.